Mark Slim Davies and Lisa O'Connor never imagined their lives would collide with Liverpool's deadliest gangs, but within months, they were caught in a web of drugs, violence, and betrayal that would turn the city into the UK's most dangerous streets. Liverpool's transformation from a proud maritime city into the heart of Britain's drug empire began quietly, hidden beneath the noise of crumbling docks and fading industries. During the 1980s, the city was struggling. Unemployment rose sharply as factories closed and trade declined, leaving generations of working-class families trapped in poverty. The once bustling port that connected Liverpool to the world became a ghost of its former self. But in the shadows of economic collapse, opportunity emerged for those willing to cross the line. The same shipping routes that once carried cotton and spices from distant lands became the perfect cover for a new kind of trade, one that would poison the city from the inside out. As global drug cartels searched for reliable entry points into the UK, Liverpool's location made it ideal. Ships from South America and Africa arrived daily, unloading countless containers. Customs checks were limited, and corruption was easy to exploit. Hidden among legitimate cargo, smugglers began sneaking in shipments of cocaine, heroin, and cannabis. These early operations were small, but they planted the seeds of a network that would soon spread across the nation. The port's labyrinth of warehouses, tunnels, and storage yards became havens for traffickers who understood that in chaos, power could be found. At first, only a few local criminals understood the potential of the drug market. Street gangs that once survived on theft and protection rackets began experimenting with small-scale distribution. The profits were instant, far greater than anything traditional crime could offer. Word spread fast through the estates. Selling drugs wasn't just crime, it was survival. In neighborhoods like Toxteth and Kirkdale, where poverty ruled and opportunity was scarce, young men saw dealing as their only escape. The streets that once echoed with laughter and music now carried a different rhythm, the constant hum of fear, greed, and ambition. Police attention during this time was focused on political unrest and gang violence, not drugs. This allowed dealers to expand quietly, forming connections with smugglers who could deliver supply without interruption. Money began pouring into the hands of people who, just years earlier, couldn't afford a bus ticket. Flashy cars and gold jewelry appeared overnight. The gap between the struggling working class and the newly rich underworld widened, and resentment grew. Families were torn apart by addiction, while others thrived off the profits it created. The moral lines that once defined right and wrong blurred as more people became involved, whether as users, dealers, or silent bystanders. By the early 1990s, Liverpool's underworld had matured. What began as scattered street selling turned into a coordinated system of distribution and control. The docks remained the entry point, but the reach extended far beyond the Mersey. Drugs from Liverpool were making their way into Manchester, Leeds, and Birmingham. The city had unknowingly become the foundation of Britain's new drug economy. As unemployment continued and despair deepened, the trade grew stronger. The police were still struggling to understand just how organized it had become. Beneath the surface of everyday life, Liverpool was changing, and the darkness spreading through its veins was only just beginning to take shape. As the 1990s unfolded, Liverpool's struggling neighborhoods became the breeding ground for a new kind of power, the rise of the street crews. Young men who had grown up surrounded by poverty and frustration began forming small, tight-knit groups that ruled their local territories with intimidation and loyalty. These crews were not born from traditional organized crime, but from desperation, shaped by unemployment, social neglect, and the absence of opportunity. What started as groups of friends protecting their blocks quickly turned into sophisticated operations, controlling the city's growing drug market. Every estate had its own enforcers, suppliers, and watchers. To outsiders they looked like ordinary youths. In reality, they were the architects of a criminal empire in its infancy. The competition between these groups was fierce. Each crew fought for control over certain corners, pubs, and housing estates where drug sales flourished. Violence became the language of business. Disputes over territory often ended in bloodshed, with guns and knives replacing fists as the tools of control. Police were overwhelmed by the surge in violence, yet they underestimated how organized the gangs had become. Beneath the surface, the crews were building networks that connected them to larger smuggling rings operating through Liverpool's docks. The once scattered underworld was slowly merging into a single dangerous ecosystem, one that would soon extend its reach across the UK. Among the emerging names was a group known locally as the Edge Lane Boys. They were young, ruthless, and innovative. They understood that to dominate the streets, they needed to control supply. Through contacts in Spain and Morocco, they established direct connections with international traffickers, bringing in cannabis and cocaine in bulk. This new level of access gave them an edge over rivals, allowing them to flood the streets with cheaper, purer drugs. Their profits skyrocketed, and their influence grew rapidly. Other gangs took notice, mimicking their methods, and seeking their own foreign partners. What began as small-scale dealing had transformed into an international business run from the back streets of Liverpool. The wealth pouring into the city's underworld changed everything. Lavish lifestyles became symbols of success. Designer clothes, luxury cars, and expensive holidays were used to recruit the next generation. Teenagers looked up to gang members who flaunted money and power, seeing them as role models in a city where honest work seemed impossible. At the same time, addiction rates in poorer areas soared. The same communities that supplied the dealers also suffered most from the destruction drugs caused. It was a vicious cycle, one feeding the other, trapping entire families in crime and despair. By the late 1990s, Liverpool's gangs had become a silent army. They operated in shadows, spreading their influence into nightclubs, bars, and taxi companies. To launder money, the city had entered a new era where the line between criminal and businessman blurred. The drug trade was no longer a secret, it was an empire in plain sight. Law enforcement struggled to keep up, unaware that the street crews they once dismissed as small-time thugs were about to become some of the most powerful criminal organizations in British history. By the early 2000s, Liverpool's underworld had evolved into something far more dangerous and profitable than anyone had anticipated. Cocaine had become the new currency of power, and the city's gangs were no longer just local street dealers. They were international suppliers feeding a nationwide epidemic. The trade was cleaner, faster, and more efficient than ever before. The purity of the product was unmatched, making Liverpool's cocaine some of the most sought after in Britain. At the center of this booming industry were two rival factions, each determined to dominate the city's lucrative drug routes. What began as neighborhood rivalries had now turned into an all-out war for control of millions in illegal profits. The competition between these factions intensified when new European routes opened through the Netherlands and Belgium. Smugglers used hidden compartments in cars, cargo shipments, and even ferry lines to move vast quantities of drugs directly into the city. The gangs no longer depended solely on the docks. They had diversified their routes and built alliances across borders. The cocaine boom flooded the city with money. Expensive cars lined the driveways of council estates, while luxury apartments and nightclubs became fronts for laundering cash. But beneath the appearance of success lay chaos and bloodshed. The gangs operated like corporations but settled disputes like soldiers at war. Every betrayal, every missed payment was answered with violence. Shootings became frequent, often carried out in broad daylight. Streets once known for their working-class pride were transformed into crime scenes marked by gunfire and fear. Residents learned to keep their heads down and their mouths shut. Police patrols increased, but the criminals were always one step ahead. Their networks stretched from Spain's Costa del Sol to the streets of Glasgow and London. They used coded language, burner phones, and encrypted messaging, long before law enforcement understood how deeply technology had changed the game. Each arrest seemed meaningless, as replacements stepped in within days. The drug trade was no longer dependent on individuals. It was a system self-sustaining and relentless. The wealth from cocaine reshaped Liverpool's criminal landscape. The city's gangs expanded their reach beyond drugs, investing in property, car dealerships, and logistics companies to clean their profits. Some members became almost untouchable, hidden behind layers of financial transactions and shell businesses. Others were reckless, flaunting their success in music videos, nightclubs, and social media posts. This visibility attracted attention from both the police and rival crews, sparking a series of violent confrontations that left the city gripped by fear. By the mid-2000s, the violence had spilled over into surrounding towns, dragging new players into the conflict. The once local turf wars had turned into national headlines, with media outlets labeling Liverpool as one of the UK's most dangerous drug hubs. Behind every glamorous story of wealth and power was a darker truth: broken families, dead teenagers, and communities drowning in addiction. The cocaine boom had made Liverpool rich in crime but poor in peace. What began as a business had become a blood-soaked empire, and the city was now trapped in its own success. As the drug trade flourished through the 2000s, Liverpool's criminal networks began to evolve into something even more sophisticated and far-reaching. The city's reputation as a reliable gateway for illegal substances drew attention from powerful figures abroad. Cartels from Colombia, smugglers from Morocco, and moneymen from Spain all saw opportunity in Liverpool's ports and its web of loyal street dealers. What once seemed like a local problem had now become part of an international operation, and Liverpool was its beating heart. The port that once powered the British Empire was now being used to import cocaine by the ton, hidden within shipping containers filled with fruit, textiles, or machinery. Each successful delivery brought unimaginable profit, and the criminals behind it operated with ruthless precision. The connection to Spain's Costa del Sol became especially significant. The warm coast, known for its beaches and nightlife, turned into a safe haven for British gangsters escaping police attention back home. Many relocated there, managing their empires from luxury villas, using encrypted phones and offshore accounts. These men were invisible to the public, but controlled the flow of drugs across Europe. Spanish authorities began calling it the Costa del Crime, because it became a meeting point for drug lords from Britain, Ireland, and Eastern Europe. From their sun-soaked hideouts, they coordinated massive shipments, ensuring that cocaine moved seamlessly from South America to Liverpool's streets. The profits were staggering, and the control they held was absolute. The smuggling operations became increasingly creative. Fishing boats, private yachts, and even refrigerated trucks were used to transport drugs. Small-time couriers were paid to carry cocaine across Europe, often unaware of who they were truly working for. The sophistication of these operations made it difficult for police to trace the full network. Each gang operated like a business unit, independent but connected to the same international supplier. These alliances transformed Liverpool from a local distribution center into a critical hub for the entire UK's drug market. It wasn't just about controlling territory anymore, it was about controlling logistics, supply chains, and money flow. As the wealth poured in, corruption began to seep into unexpected places. Bribes, intimidation, and favors allowed shipments to move without detection. Even honest dock workers sometimes turned a blind eye, afraid of retaliation or tempted by the easy cash offered for silence. While gang leaders enjoyed luxury abroad, Liverpool's working-class communities suffered the consequences. Addiction rates rose sharply, and violence spread like wildfire. The divide between the wealthy criminals and the broken neighborhoods they profited from grew deeper than ever before. By the late 2000s, Liverpool's drug lords had achieved something no one thought possible. They had internationalized their criminal enterprise. The city was now part of a vast global web of smuggling routes, stretching from Colombia's jungles to the streets of Merseyside. Money was laundered through offshore accounts, while drugs continued to pour in through disguised shipments. Liverpool had become more than just a port city, it was now a crucial artery in the global drug trade. A place where organized crime operated with power, intelligence, and terrifying efficiency. By 2010, Liverpool's criminal world had grown so large that it could no longer hide in the shadows. The violence, the sudden bursts of wealth, and the scale of the drug movement forced authorities to take notice. The Merseyside police, along with national and international agencies, launched one of the most aggressive crackdowns in British law enforcement history. Major operations began targeting the most powerful figures in the city's underworld, using technology and intelligence in ways never seen before. Undercover agents were planted deep within gangs. Surveillance drones monitored movements, and financial experts tracked money trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. The goal was simple: to dismantle Liverpool's drug empire piece by piece. One of the earliest, large-scale efforts, Operation Venetic, exposed the hidden communication channels used by gang leaders. For years they had relied on encrypted devices that they believed were untraceable, using them to plan shipments, assign roles, and even order hits. When law enforcement cracked these encrypted systems, it opened a window into the heart of organized crime. Hundreds of messages revealed the depth of Liverpool's involvement in the international trade, from dealers arranging shipments worth millions, to local distributors discussing street-level sales. Within months, dozens of arrests followed. Entire networks were brought down overnight. The public saw this as a victory, but inside the underworld, it sparked chaos. Every arrest left a power vacuum, and younger, more reckless players rushed to fill the gaps. Some of them were barely out of their teens, eager to prove themselves and unwilling to negotiate. The older generation had been businessmen, cold, calculating, and strategic. The new generation was impulsive and violent, more interested in reputation than control. The result was a wave of bloodshed that spread across Merseyside, undoing years of police progress. For law enforcement, the challenge became one of endurance. Each success revealed how deeply entrenched the system was. Drug shipments didn't stop, they simply changed routes. Arrested gang leaders continued to issue orders from behind bars, using coded messages and smuggled phones. Money still flowed through the same channels, only under new names. The authorities realized they weren't fighting individuals anymore. They were battling a culture that had been growing for decades. Still, there were moments of triumph. Major seizures at the port cut millions from the gang's profits. Coordinated raids across the UK dismantled warehouses used for storage and distribution. International cooperation led to arrests in Spain, Holland, and even South America. Yet the city's streets remained tense. Locals whispered about the next raid, the next killing, the next headline. Every victory came with consequences, as criminals adapted faster and grew bolder. By the end of the decade, the police had made record arrests and confiscated tons of drugs. But the overall picture hadn't changed. The faces were different, but the system remained the same. Liverpool's drug empire had survived every crackdown and emerged more resilient each time. For the authorities, it was no longer just about catching criminals. It was about breaking a cycle that had become part of the city's identity. The years following the major police crackdowns were some of the bloodiest Liverpool had ever seen. The city's criminal landscape had been shattered, and the once powerful organizations that controlled the drug trade were now splintered into smaller, more unpredictable factions. Each group wanted dominance, and none were willing to back down. With old leaders behind bars and younger, hungrier figures rising to replace them, violence became the only language left. Gunshots echoed across quiet streets, and drive-by shootings turned ordinary neighborhoods into war zones. Families began to live in fear, keeping their children indoors and avoiding certain streets after dark. What had once been an underground conflict was now spilling openly onto the city's pavements. The new generation of criminals lacked the discipline and hierarchy that once kept violence contained. These were young men raised in haggis, molded by poverty, and driven by desperation for fast money and fame. Social media began to play an unexpected role in this new era of gang culture. Videos and online posts, glorifying wealth and revenge, fueled rivalries, turning local disputes into citywide feuds. Instead of quiet intimidation, gangs sought public recognition, flaunting their power through online taunts and coded messages. Every slight, every rumor, every betrayal demanded retaliation. The cycle of violence became relentless. Ordinary citizens paid the price. Innocent people were caught in the crossfire, as rival gangs fought for control over drug routes and debt collections. In several cases, bystanders were injured or killed simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Community leaders pleaded for peace, but the streets had already descended into chaos. The police, stretched thin, struggled to keep up with the rapid escalation. Every arrest seemed to provoke another act of revenge. Funeral after funeral took place in the city's churches, with families mourning sons, brothers and fathers who had become victims of a war they didn't start. Children became targets for recruitment, drawn into gangs with promises of protection, quick money, and belonging. They were given small roles, carrying weapons, delivering drugs, or acting as lookouts, and before long, they were trapped in a life that offered no way out. Many of them had grown up seeing gang members as role models, and for them, crime wasn't a choice, it was survival. Teachers and social workers saw the pattern repeating itself, but resources were limited and fear silenced many who wanted to help. By the mid-2010s, the violence had reached a point where even seasoned criminals began to fear for their safety. No one was safe from betrayal. Alliances shifted constantly, and murders were often carried out by former friends or relatives. The city's reputation suffered as media coverage painted Liverpool as one of the most dangerous places in the UK. For many residents, it felt like living under siege, a constant tension that hung in the air, where silence meant safety and speaking out could mean death. The bloodshed had turned the drug empire inward, consuming itself, leaving scars that would take generations to heal. While the violence on Liverpool's streets captured headlines, a hidden empire was quietly operating behind the scenes, far removed from the public eye. This was a world of calculated strategy, money laundering and influence, that extended into areas most people never associated with crime. Businessmen, nightclub owners, and property investors became the unseen backbone of the drug trade, quietly facilitating operations that funded some of the city's most notorious gangs. Unlike the street-level criminals who drew attention through violence and bravado, these figures worked in silence, ensuring that the flow of money and drugs continued uninterrupted. Their influence was subtle, but it was absolute. Money laundering became the key to sustaining the empire. Cash from drug sales flowed into legitimate businesses, disguising the origin of millions of pounds. Car dealerships, convenience stores, and construction companies acted as fronts, allowing criminals to reinvest their profits legally while avoiding suspicion. Offshore accounts and shell companies were used to store funds abroad, making it nearly impossible for authorities to trace. The more money they laundered, the deeper they embedded themselves into the city's economy. Even banks and accountants were sometimes unknowingly complicit, drawn in by the allure of profit or pressured by threats. Liverpool had become a city where appearances could be deceiving, and wealth could hide the darkest secrets. These hidden operators wielded influence in ways the public rarely saw. Nightclubs, bars, and entertainment venues doubled as meeting points for gang leaders and their associates. Deals were struck under the cover of music and lights, while law enforcement struggled to gather evidence. The network extended into politics and law, with certain figures using connections to obstruct investigations, delay prosecutions, or gain insider knowledge. In some cases, intimidation was enough to ensure compliance. The gang leaders who ruled from behind the scenes were just as powerful as those on the streets, but far more untouchable. Despite the outward chaos of shootings, stabbings, and street-level crime, this hidden empire thrived. While the younger, violent generation fought openly for territory, the older, more strategic figures focused on control and profit. They manipulated the system to their advantage, ensuring the drug trade continued to grow while minimizing direct risk to themselves. They had learned from past crackdowns, becoming more careful, more patient, and more innovative. The streets were a distraction, a visible demonstration of power, while the real wealth and control remained hidden. This duality created a dangerous ecosystem. The violence kept communities in fear, the police occupied, and media attention focused on the wrong players, while the hidden empire expanded quietly. Liverpool had become a city where crime was layered. The chaos on the surface fed the stability beneath. Drug lords operated like CEOs, overseeing operations worth millions, dictating the flow of the city's most dangerous commodities. The scale and sophistication of their influence were staggering, and it revealed a terrifying truth. Controlling Liverpool's streets was only half the battle. The real power lay in the invisible networks that few dared to challenge. The city's underworld had grown beyond the grasp of traditional law enforcement, entrenched in wealth, influence, and a cunning that ensured it could survive almost anything. In recent years, Liverpool has begun to fight back, though the scars of decades of crime remain visible in its streets and communities. After years of unchecked drug trade and violence, a new generation of law enforcement officers, social workers, and community activists has emerged, determined to reclaim the city from the underworld. This movement is not just about arrests and crackdowns, it is about rebuilding the social fabric that was torn apart during the height of Liverpool's drug empire. Schools, youth centers, and charities now focus on prevention, education, and rehabilitation, aiming to break the cycle that trapped so many young people in crime. Programs teach children about the dangers of drugs and gang culture, offering alternatives in sports, arts, and vocational training. Former gang members have become unexpected but powerful allies in this effort. Some have chosen to speak publicly, sharing their experiences to warn others of the consequences of a life in crime. Their testimonies are raw, honest, and frightening, revealing the full extent of Liverpool's transformation into a drug hub. Many tell of friends lost to shootings, addictions that destroyed families, and the constant fear of betrayal. By confronting the reality of the city's past, they provide a roadmap for a different future, one where young people can aspire to legal success rather than criminal notoriety. Law enforcement has also adapted. Modern policing relies heavily on intelligence and collaboration, both locally and internationally. Police now target not only street-level dealers, but also the financial networks and hidden operators that support them. Undercover operations, surveillance, and data analysis have become standard, and task forces coordinate across cities and borders to dismantle criminal enterprises before they can grow. Arrests and prosecutions continue, but the focus is increasingly on prevention and rehabilitation rather than simply punishment. Despite these efforts, the road to recovery is long and difficult. Many neighborhoods still struggle with addiction, poverty, the lingering influence of criminal networks. The culture of fear and mistrust developed over decades is not easily erased. Families who lived through the height of violence often remain wary, and children growing up in these areas must navigate a landscape still shaped by the city's dark past. The drug trade, though reduced, has not disappeared entirely. Opportunistic criminals continue to exploit gaps in social services and law enforcement, keeping the threat alive. Yet, there is hope. Liverpool's story is not just one of crime and destruction, it is also a story of resilience and resistance. The city's citizens, activists, and authorities have begun to reclaim control, proving that even the deepest roots of criminal power can be challenged. Rehabilitation programs help addicts return to productive lives. Community policing restores trust between citizens and law enforcement, and education initiatives aim to prevent the next generation from following the same dangerous path. The transformation is ongoing, and Liverpool is far from fully healed. But the city's fight demonstrates a powerful truth: no empire of crime is invincible. The streets that were once ruled by fear are slowly filling with hope, and the city is learning to rebuild itself from the shadow of decades-long corruption and violence. Liverpool's struggle is a testament to the resilience of communities and the possibility of redemption, even after the darkest chapters of history. The city may have been the UK's drug capital, but it is now a battleground for its own recovery, and its people are determined to win.